Hello, Coordination. How you doing? I got a great episode today with Solarpunk Girl, Phoebe Tickell, who is an imagination activist. Her work centers on the intersection of Web3 and regen and the toolkits of collective imagination, which I would basically summarize as what are the possible worlds out there if we expand our awareness from just what we need now out in the temporal plane to what will future generations need, and what do the people in our communities, nations, and worlds need, and also including in our awareness, what do the different material systems out there need. So it's been a really sort of interesting episode to talk with Phoebe about imagination technology, imagining new worlds. And I think that it's a core complementary piece to what we're doing in the regenerative cryptoeconomics space to imagine what kind of worlds are possible. What do we want to include in our awareness? How do we build impact DAOs that have positive externalities for the world? Well, it starts with imagining what's possible and iterating towards those worlds. It's a really fun episode with Phoebe Tickell, and I hope you enjoy it.
If you're trying to grow and preserve your crypto wealth, optimizing your taxes is just as lucrative as trying to find the next hidden gem. Alto IRA can help you invest in crypto in tax advantage ways to help you preserve your hard-earned money. Also, Crypto IRA lets you invest in more than 150 coins and tokens with all the same tax advantages of an IRA. They make it easy to fund your alternative IRA or crypto IRA via your 401k or by contributing directly from your bank account. There is no setup or account fees, and it's all you need to do to invest in crypto tax-free. Let me repeat that again. You can invest in crypto tax-free. Diversify like the pros and trade without tax headaches. Open an Alto Crypto IRA to invest in crypto tax-free. Just go to altoira.com/bankless. That's ALTOIRA.com/bankless and start investing in crypto today.
So, you've got some money, but how are you gonna use it? You want to spend.
You, me, shopping, now, bro.
When you know you should be saving.
You'll never buy a house at this rate.
But what if you could spend and save at the same time? For the enlightened kind, with inquiring minds, a new world awaits. Set yourself free with completely flexible, self-repaying loan technology. Supported on desktop and mobile. Seize the power of Alchemix, allowing you to spend and save at the same time. Leverage your wealth without risk of liquidation. Take out a loan that repays itself. By using yield from your deposit to pay off your balance, your only debt is time. What was once inconceivable is now within your grasp.
Are you winning, son?
Hello, everyone. I'm here with Phoebe Tickell, the Solarpunk Girl on Twitter. What's up, Phoebe?
Hey, hey, hey. Or should I say, hey, hey, hey?
Someone's been watching my talks. So great to have you here. I think that you and I got connected a few months ago and really hit it off talking about your work as an imagination activist. So can you tell me what that is?
Yes, for sure. So imagination activists are basically activists powered by the imagination. So I believe like one of the biggest problems of our time at the moment is the narrowing and the boxing in of imagination so that folks don't even have a sense of what's not on the table in terms of what kind of lives we lead, what kind of society we live in, who it's possible to be. So it's that realm of the unimaginable that I think is getting smaller and smaller. And it's kind of driven by having been part of Extinction Rebellion and feeling like part of the reason Extinction Rebellion petered out was because it was a movement based on despair. So a lot of people who are solar punks understand this, that we need movements that are also driven by hope and active hope and imagination.
Got it. Can you say more about Extinction Rebellion for those of us who aren't familiar with it?
Yes. So Extinction Rebellion was a movement of hundreds of thousands of people, most active, I'd say, between 2019 and 2020, like around about that time, founded by a group of founders, largely in the UK. So Gail Bradbrook, Roger Hallam, a couple others. And it was an environmental movement and had Greta as one of the figureheads. And they organized these large-scale rebellions, so taking over like Trafalgar Square and orchestrating like large direct actions.
And so Extinction Rebellion was kind of a reaction to the negative, and your work as an imagination activist is trying to chart a positive path forward and break away from the status quo. Is that more or less correct?
I'd say so, yeah. And it's also driven by the belief that the solutions that we are trying to create for the global problems that we face are being created by a certain way of thinking. So there's almost like a layer underneath of everything that we're doing as activists, as innovators, as technology builders. Like there are scripts that run our ways of thinking, which in themselves create the problems. So the solutions we create actually end up being the new problems, which is especially apparent in technology. Like new technologies are created, and then they create a whole bunch of new problems as well. So I'm really interested in how do we shift perception and the way that we think and imagine in that deeper level.
Right. And I know that you're the founder of Moral Imagining. Can you say more about your work that you're doing there?
Yeah, so and that actually directly relates to, I'd say, Web3 and distributed governance and decentralized organizing. So for about 6 years, I was really working in the realm of distributed governance. That started off by running an education company when I was 22 with a couple other folks, which we tried to run as a non-hierarchical, decentralized organization, which ended up being a massive mess and way more difficult than I could have imagined, which basically sparked my interest in like, how do you actually do that? Like, I'd never thought about the fact that there are these different blueprints for the ways that you can run organizations. And suddenly that opened up this sense of like, oh, this is like a sandbox where, the corporation and the top-down pyramid is not the only way. And we've got all of this new technology where we can actually run, organizations on software. So that kind of opened up a whole bunch of work and getting organized, getting involved in something called Inspiral, which is basically like an organization that uses Web 2 software to organize. So collective decision-making, participatory budgeting. And so that was a really big part of my last 10 years was working in distributed governance. But while I was in that realm, I realized that the core thing I'm interested in is how we make decisions. And even if we get all of these new mechanisms for making decisions in different ways and making decisions in collective ways, if we can't imagine the kinds of futures and the kind of world that we want to live in, and if our imaginations are actually narrowed down, then it doesn't matter how collective or how many different ways we have to make decisions, we won't make decisions that are for the benefit of the planet and the benefit of people.
Yeah, your experience there kind of reminds me of building a DAO and the work that we've done with Gitcoin DAO. I always feel like I'm toggling back and forth between my aperture of awareness being, do we build Gitcoin grants or do we build the machine that builds Gitcoin grants? And I always feel like I'm getting gummed up with building the DAO when I really want to focus on building Gitcoin grants, because you don't realize how much you get out of the box with a company. You get payroll from China, you get benefits, you get all these different SaaS products. And by trying to build a DAO, you have to build all of those things from scratch, or at least there's service providers that are not as advanced. And I'm always stuck between inventing a new way of doing work so that we can do the work versus just kind of YOLO doing the work yourself. And I'm seeing a parallel there with your work in trying to create imagination, but also trying to create a non-hierarchical organization that's doing that. You built a non-hierarchical organization in Web 2 in the Inspiral network. Can you say what you learned from doing that and how you're kind of approaching Web 3?
Yeah, for sure. So Inspiral already existed when I joined. It was founded in 2010 and was also the creator of the software Lumio and the software CoBudget as well. So it was interesting because it was sort of like a Web 2 experience of a DAO. So I was already trained in a kind of Web 2 DAO before I moved into working in Web 3 DAOs, and arriving into the Web 3 scene in around late 2017, 2018, it became really apparent to me that a lot of the skills and the capacities that this group of humans in Inspiral, about 160 people, many of them based in New Zealand, but essentially a global decentralized network of people working together in an organization. And I have to remind myself that before the pandemic, like working on Zoom and like working in this distributed way was actually really quite rare. Like for most people, their everyday jobs, like most people had never tried Zoom, had never used digital software to coordinate in a way. So we were, that experience, I felt like at the time I was one of the only people in the networks that I was part of who was actually making their livelihood off being part of this network of people who I'd never actually met before. So the thing that became really apparent when I started getting involved in DAOs in around 2018 was that a lot of the skills and the capacities in terms of the soft skills, like decentralized leadership and collective decision making, and the fact that there are these menus of different ways of making decisions, a lot of that seemed to be very absent in the Web3 scene. So I could see a massive need for that. I feel like that's being kind of met quite a lot more now. Like a lot of like sociocracy and holacracy folks are starting to stream into the Web3 scene, which is great. And the other thing I felt was massively missing in both the kind of distributed organizing, teal leadership, next gen organization scene and the Web3 scene was the planet, like ecology, and like where is that? So I absolutely love, as you know, the whole green pill meme. I love that this is about like bringing that solarpunk green regen topic into Web3, because I felt like it's really, really been missing, not just in this area, but also in like all of the other distributed horizontal governance worlds as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious what you learned. It feels like you've kind of been front running this whole decentralized organization thing by doing it in Web 2 before Web 3 existed. What did you learn from Lumio and Spiral and all of those years that could possibly be taken forward into Web 3?
Such a great question. I think one of the key learnings was that hierarchy isn't the problem. Like when you, my friend Rich Bartlett has written a great article on this, which I can dig out and we can include in the show notes. So it was really this sense of like hierarchy as being, is the demon that needs to be like slayed, and actually we need to move to a fully decentralized system, and then everything will be fair. And like as long as we can just like learn the skills, like within the Web 2 distributed governance world, it was like if we can just learn the skills and the decision making protocols well enough, then we'll be able to like have this harmonic organizing where everything is fair and just. And I see the kind of parallel in the Web3 scene is like, if we could just like solve coordination or like decision, like all of these like protocols, if we could get like the perfect voting system and the perfect like ways to solve like the free rider problem, like all of this coordination stuff, like then we'll have harmony. But what became really clear was like, actually, the problem is not at the level of necessarily at the level of organizing and structures. And that's what really drove me into working in imagination, because what I saw, I think there's two ways to approach the same problem. Like one of them is coordination, like decision-making structures or encoded, basically encoded ways of coordinating on a blockchain, or you go and start working at the level of culture and at the level of like human development. And so moral imagination is about helping build the capacity of building ethics and values and imagination. So bringing those two together. But to go back to your original question, what I felt was the big learning from Inspiral was that it's not that hierarchy is the problem. It's actually the kind of, that's almost like a category error. Like the issue is at the level of what kind of leadership and what kind of organizing you have. Like, is there accountability? Is there transparency in the system? Is there a flow of power? And you can have really unhealthy decentralized systems where it looks like it's decentralized, but actually the power dynamics are really unhealthy. And you don't have this cycling of power. You don't have transparency. I mean, within blockchains, that's less of a problem. But, you could have like apparent transparency by having a bunch of data that is available for people to see, like, in a DAO, but actually a lot of the really key information of like who actually makes the decisions, who has that like soft influence is hidden. So you get this tyranny of structurelessness. And there's a great essay, like the tyranny of structurelessness is like probably one of the best things I ended up finding within that time. It's an essay that lays out that problem. I think you tweeted at one point saying like, I'm trying to like learn from decentralized organizations. And that was like one of the key things. And I think like for anybody who's interested, like interviewing like 10 people from distributed organizations about their experiences and their hardships is probably one of the best ways to get the learning of how to organize in that way.
Right. Tyranny of the Structuralistness is canon, I think, in this space. And hopefully those of us who have read it have come across it as a purely intellectual exercise, not because we're stuck in a tyranny of the structuralistness somewhere and we're looking to name it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's humans trying to organize. It seems to be, pretty much unavoidable.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if we can pull that thread of moral imagining, and I wonder if you can take us away from the status quo. What kind of worlds could be possible, and what tools can our audience out there use in order to imagine what possible futures are plausible or desirable, and lead us there? Tell us about moral imagining.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. So I'd say there are many different ways of using imagination, and Moral Imaginations is a research and design studio to develop those tools, especially around collective imagination. I'd say like the two main areas of imagining that we're developing and have developed to this point are like the first tool is around using imagination to expand the moral circle of concern. So when you're thinking about how do we make decisions or who or what is considered in a decision, using imagination to actually expand your perception, to look through the eyes of a future generation human, like 7 generations into the future, and actually use that like really radical shift in perception to then make decisions that look completely different to the ones you would make if you were just in your default mode perception of like you as a human with your family, with your friends, with your like political ideology. So that's like really one of the vectors that we use imagination to stretch the mind. So looking through the eyes of a future generation human, looking through the eyes of a non-human actor. So really trying to make that like invisible, the invisible actors who are currently not accounted for within the system, like helping those become visible. And helping people also embed within their context and history. So using imagination to bring alive this like very cosmic sense of being a human being that is the result of a long chain of evolution with many different chapters and many different creatures that have given rise to you being here today. So it's also, in a sense, like religion and like paganism and animism used to do that for us. It used to take the atomized human and give us ways of expanding our perception so that the decisions we'd make, love thy neighbor, like these very basic rules were helping like bolster our decision making and the ways that we organize as a society. So that's one of the major areas that we're really interested in developing imagination that could eventually be part of governance. So part of the way we run organizations or part of the way that we make democratic decisions. And actually there are a couple of friends of mine we're collaborating around like, how do you embed this kind of perception into organizations? So like, how do you bring a river onto the board of an organization, and how could that river be given a voice, and how could that also be connected with then, let's say, dividends from the organization going to that river and humans then also coordinating to protect and regenerate the river. So these really interesting ways of reconnecting human beings and organizations with the natural world and also bringing that perception in. Super interesting. So that's like a whole bucket of the imagination world and how that connects to governance. And then on the other side, you've got the more, I'd say like default, like temporal imagination. So how can we expand our time perceptions, like getting this sense of deep time and long-termism? How can we, do that like futures thinking work, which can be like strategic foresight or like strategic futures, where you actually like, take, it's almost like expanding trends from the current day. So you pick like key trends or key things that are visible in the world today, and then you iterate them out. Like, what could that look like in 5 years? And what if you take like 10 of those trends and you iterate all of them out into like 10 years into the future, and then you almost like cross-pollinate them? Like, okay, what if organizations, can have rivers or like other legal persons of nature on the board. So that's like one trend that could be possible like in 10 years from the future. And another one might be like a massive increase in refugees. Like you kind of iterate out all of these different trends and then multiply them together. So you help people really expand their sense of what the future can look like, which we're, like biologically, like not very well wired to be able to do that. Really like rational exponential thinking, like we'll just expand our sense of the present linearly, but we find it very difficult to do that exponentially. So those are the two kind of buckets of collective imagination that I think are super interesting. And then there are many different like tools and approaches, like narrative work or storytelling or working with artists and bringing, like I'm super interested in the role of artists in governance as well. How can artists bring alive different imaginaries, different actors, as I was talking about, like how can we bring the unseen and unaccounted for into our decision making?
Amazing. So let me just say back to you what I heard, and you can tell me if I'm close at all. So it sounds like it's about expanding your perception from your ego and yourself now in the direction of other people, and then also natural materials, and also temporally, so forward in time as well, which allows you to sort of contain maybe the second order effects of your actions, or design with a more systems lens. Is that a fair summary of what you said?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that's a great summary. Yeah, and I think it's that point about the second order. Like it's almost like the unintended consequences. So how can we make decisions based on an expanded sense of the impacts of those decisions, or like, thinking in a more systemic way. I think that's a great way of summarizing it. Yeah.
It's a really interesting exercise because I know that me as a human, I have these selfish needs. It's almost like the marshmallow test. Like, do I want to eat the marshmallow now, or do I want to save it for the future? And,
exactly.
I'm reminded of a couple times I've messed around with loving kindness meditation. I think it's called metta. And the whole idea is that you think of other people and you imagine how you love them. And then the whole exercise is to expand that circle outwards of your love and even include people that you have conflict with. And it's sort of a useful tool I've found on many different levels for creating empathy with other people, but also especially those that you disagree with, realizing that they have their own limited perspective, and it's a coordination failure. It's Moloch when we have a disagreement. It's not that they're my enemy. And so I don't know if you've ever played with metta or loving kindness meditation, but that's been my experience that I'm coming at this with. And I found it to be an interesting exercise in expanding awareness.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And obviously Buddhism has got like 2,000 years of developing these spiritual technologies. And you can imagine like governance systems in the future where it's necessary to do like a meta exercise before entering a decision-making process. Yeah. And I'm basically just saying that the imagination is a really powerful tool to do that kind of perception shift. And that if we can decide like what kind of world do we want to live in? And I guess this touches on Solarpunk as well. Like, do we value non-human beings? Yes. Like, should they be valued, should all life be valued on the same level? If yes, then we should find ways to actually account for that. And I think it's interesting as well, the way that you can start to imagine like, a piece of land or a river owning itself. Like there's this intersection as well between the imagination and technology, where you could really start to imagine like these systems that help bolster up and scaffold these non-human actors being involved, being given rights, being given like decision-making power.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's almost like you're creating sovereignty for non-human actors when you start to build a connector for a river or for a meadow to be represented with their rights in the open source financial system.
When you shop for plane tickets, you probably use Kayak, Expedia, or Google to compare ticket prices. So why would you limit yourself to just one exchange when you trade crypto? When you make your trades, you want to make sure you're getting the best possible price on your trade, and that's why you should be using Matcha. Matcha has smart order routing that splits your trade across all the various liquidity sources in Ethereum. and is also operational on Polygon, Avalanche, Binance Smart Chain, and other chains. Trading on Matcha is super easy because it pools the liquidity for me in a single, easy-to-use platform and allows me to make limit on-chain orders, so you can set and forget your DeFi trades and they will go through automatically while you're away. So when you're making a trade, head over to matcha.xyz/Bankless and connect your wallet to start getting the best prices and most liquidity when you trade your crypto assets. Opolis is a member-owned digital employment cooperative offering payroll, health insurance, and membership perks that go beyond the basics that you would find at your normal 9-to-5. Opolis offers not only health benefits, but also pay stubs and W-2s, workers' comp, and unemployment insurance, as well as disability benefits for independent DAO workers that are traditionally reserved for regular employment situations. Opolis provides a tax-compliant way to get your paycheck in crypto and professionalize your work-life situation. Opolis members enjoy an average of 20 to 50% savings on top-rated national group health insurances, as well as self-sovereign portable employment. You can also get tokenized rewards based on consumption, staking, and referrals, and also the ability to fund payroll in fiat and stablecoins without the use of centralized exchange. You can also receive paychecks in fiat and whitelisted digital currencies. So sign up for Opolis today and get 1,000 work and 1,000 bank tokens when you become a member of Opolis by May 25th, 2022, and get started working your self-sovereign life.
I've been working on Impact DAOs and defining the Impact DAO space, which we've defined as any DAO or any Web3 system that has positive externalities. And it feels like what you're talking about with imagination tech right here is a way of imagining or sort of understanding and mapping out the different positive or negative externalities that our actions have on these different systems and Impact DAOs. This feels like a core money Lego or like a core technology Lego for building more regenerative cryptoeconomic system.
Yeah, I think 100%. I think imagination is it's a public good, and it's part of the as you say, the Lego blocks of these more regenerative governance and economic systems for sure. I think I'd say largely my work sits in two buckets. One is helping people expand imagination, and also I'm very passionate about increasing the global commons of imagined worlds. I really believe that as a kid coming into the world, you should, just the same way there are seed banks or encyclopedias, you should be able to look into these seed banks of alternative worlds and alternative futures, so that you could just have a sense of this reality is not the only reality that could exist. It could be so different. And just having that sense, I think, is that's the core of being an imagination activist. So that's one bucket. And the second bucket is, okay, once you've imagined those different worlds, how do you learn the skills to actually bring it into reality? And so educating people, that was the essence of this course that I ran with somebody called Stephen Reed, the Tools for Regenerative Renaissance, how people don't even realize that there are actually huge, so many ways of doing regenerative agriculture, all of these different methods and tools and practices, people just don't realize that they're there. So you can imagine these better futures, but you might just not know, how do you actually build the skills? How could you and your community upskill in these different capacities and tools and skills? And I think crypto and Web3 is definitely part of that. And I guess the interesting thing for me around the GreenPill meme, and I guess a little bit of a provocation, is what I see is, and I'd love to kind of flip it back to you, Kevin, that, the GreenPill meme is kind of within the Web3 world. So it's Web3 is the almost the imagination opener. And then the GreenPill is okay, but regen Web3. And I guess my provocation would be regen is the kind of umbrella, and Web3 is one tool within many different tools. And people kind of enter, I think that a lot of people get this psychedelic wake up moment of oh my God, we can create a new society and a new world by being introduced to Web3. I wonder whether it's how do you move from that to then oh, but there's also regenerative agriculture, and there's
right.
also regenerative cooperative organizations, or all of these different ways that there are to join the regen movement. And also how convinced are you that Web3 is the solution to all of our problems? That's the question that's really on my mind.
Yeah. Well, it's fun to have someone as a guest on the podcast who flips the script back on me. I'll take a swing at that. And that's that. so I believe that there are many different forms of capital. We just had Greg Landua on the podcast. He talked about the 8 forms of capital: intellectual, material, living, spiritual, social. Wish I could name them all, but I think I got close.
Right.
And the opportunity that I see is that Web3, which is the internet of money, is the biggest lever that we have, or one of the biggest levers that we have, because there's a $2 trillion financial system, and finance interoperates with all of those different types of capital. And so what we're doing here with the GreenPill podcast, for those of us who are skilled at reading between the lines, is trying to create a Schelling point for the people who want to use Web3 to create more regenerative systems. And I see it as one of the biggest leverage points in the world. And this is maybe one of my beliefs that could be unpacked, because I believe that the old financial system is not serving us in a world in which we've got global coordination problems and we've got global existential risk. We need a global coordination substrate that actually can be that lever through which the more regenerative system is built. And so I think for me, the TLDR of me answering your question is that it's a yes and. We need to build a financial system that is aware of the global commons of imagined worlds, your words, and is able to manage the externalities to future generations, to all of these different living systems, and to humanity, to expand out. It's to expand out and able to regenerate those things. And I don't think the existing system is doing it. So I think that it's a yes and with the other systems that you mentioned. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that is fair. I think what you're saying is like currently it's the best lever that you can see to do that on a global scale, like that global level of coordination. And I guess, what I'm hearing as well is like, there might be folks, especially like Gen Z folks, like entering Web3 and getting like super excited. And what the GreenPill is about is like, yes, it's really exciting, but it's not enough. Like on its own, it's like, what do we do? What are we using it for? Which I love, and I think is really, necessary. Great.
I've seen an arc in this space where people get in the space because they want to get rich, or they want to be able to quit their jobs and work on what they actually care about. And, the money is the first thing that captures them. It brings them in the space, but then they realize all the Web3 values in the community. And it's at that point, like the phase 2, where I think dropping the GreenPill is the most poignant, because they understand the tech. And now they're like, oh, wait, I can use this for creating a better world instead of having to escape the world and create my own little private utopia. And so that's the point at which we're trying to hit the listeners. And again, it's not my agenda that I'm hitting them with. I'm trying to create a channel for greater combinations of strength and intelligence to come together. So what would you say to someone who's been through that phase 2? Okay, they've been green-pilled. What are the causes that they should get involved with? What is the imagination technology that they should hit up in order to scale up to build this new world?
I love that question. So I'm biased, but I think you should join a imagination circle, like a circle of people that you actually regularly do these collective imagination practices. And I am doing my very best to create, and with others, like a team of others, to create the resources and like open source blueprints and practices for folks to be able to do that stuff. And I think like seeing, DAOs and communities and collectives bubble up where people are doing that imagination work together, because imagination is a muscle, and collective imagination is a muscle that we're not used to flexing. And then I think like the other piece is, there's so much like exciting work to be done around like local regenerative action, like connect to the place that you live, or the place, wherever you care about, like wherever you live, wherever you're based. Like I think one of the dangers of the Web3 world is creating this like virtual layer of humans who go from like conference to conference and fly around the world. And like I've experienced that like back in 2018, that sense of like my community and my network is this like amorphous global virtual citizenship where we're like against nations and believe that we're going to create this like floating non-nation like citizenship situation. I just think like we need to root into the places that, that actually need that regeneration. And, for as many hours that you spend on like Slack and Discord and these communities and organizing, like go and spend an hour out on the land and like do that regeneration, like learn about also like where learn about your local CSA, like community supported agriculture. Like there are so many technologies and like organizing patterns and like cooperatives and all these ways that people like us have been trying to create a better world, like before the age of the internet, before Web3. Like it's all happening, and there are all these different ways of being involved. So I think it's like, as you say, yes, and like, I think it's super exciting, like these, the potential of these currencies and like DAOs and different ways of coordinating globally, but how do we balance that out with the local as well? I think that's really key. And actually, I'm like part of a couple projects, like a project with Reiki Corden from Seeds, where we're creating what's called a regen civics incubator. So like an incubator for local community, eco-village, like local regen civics projects that want to like upscale and build capacity to be able to multiply and create these like blueprints and tools and education platform capacities to multiply around the world. So I think we just need to balance out that global virtual layer with the local regenerative community building layer, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of staying grounded, is being involved in your local community. Whereas, there's so much global sort of disembodied game theory that happens with in the global system. And sometimes it's just nice to get outside and get in the sun and work in your local community. So I love that. I guess, I'm wondering, there's a couple things in my notes here that are just kind of like memes that stuck out at me as I was doing my research on you. A couple things that I wrote down here is people could tool up as they wake up, basically building global commons of imagined worlds, a toolkit of collective imagination. I'm curious, as I rattle off these memes to you, what kind of sticks out to you as the most important next thing to discuss?
I think we've already covered a lot of wake up to tool up. Those are like the two, like that's what I'm working on at the moment. I'm building a new organization that is going to really focus on those two buckets. So like Moral Imaginations exists as its design and research studio, but there's an organization now that will be focusing on that like scaling of the collective imagining and like the collective tooling up, the waking up and the tooling up. I think we kind of covered that. And if anyone's interested, like please hit me up on Twitter, Solarpunk Girl, Solarpunk_girl. And yeah, I mean, we've covered imagination commons, imagination toolkit. I mean, what kind of questions do you have? Like, I guess is this imagination stuff like totally new? Are you like, have you already been, I mean, everybody is participating in imagining. Right. And if you read sci-fi or like creative, there are many creative ways of being part of like a global imagination movement. But what stands out to you?
Yeah, well, I do think that one of the things that I think that is so interesting about what you're doing is that it's sort of imagining new world. I almost feel like we're venturing out into the fog of war, and I don't know what's out there until I kind of stumble upon it. So I kind of stumbling around in the darkness here, but maybe you could light my path and tell me what are the neatest ideas that you've landed upon about what the world could be that people may not be aware of. Like, I'm looking for sort of tangible examples of what the world could be that sort of, because they're visceral and they're examples of what you've discovered, might sort of whet people's appetites to get into imagination technology. So what are sort of the neatest imaginations that you've come up with in your time working on this?
Interesting. I'm particularly interested in this kind of interspecies justice. Like, I think it's always fascinating when people come up with like, some really wacky stuff around like a guild of pigeons who, like revolt against like all of the like spikes that exist on our buildings that like, kill pigeons, or, like some of it is pretty comical, but I think like that's the point. It's like to be able to expand out that even just that perspective of like who has rights, who has power, who can make decisions. I always find that like super inspiring. Because it's just so far from where we're at now. Like we're existing in this like totally anthropomorphized world where actually like we've spent thousands of years like killing off any species that doesn't either like directly feed us or directly feed the species that feed us. And it's like kind of extraordinary when you think about it. Like I think in 100 years, like I'm super interested in how we'll view the kind of species violence that we're doing right now. Like will it be the equivalent of like slavery 100 years ago? So like thinking about the things that we look back to 100 years ago and think like, wow, that is like so wrong. Like, how could we ever do that? What's the equivalent of those things now? Like, I think that's a very interesting exercise to go through. And you know, like a lot of vegans will also say this, like we'll look back on like the violence against cows and like factory farming. And it's seeing those things that are like right in front of our eyes, but we've just never seen it in that way. I think that's the really, really interesting thing. And I think a really key turning point was when I realized that I think this is a very just key pattern that we have basically as human beings, like attempted to destroy like every single species, plant species that doesn't directly feed our food. So like grass, like we've basically like plastered the whole globe in grass because that's what our food eats. And it's like that, just having that perspective of like, wow, like it really shifts the sense of like human beings role and like what kind of role and what kind of actor we have like decided to be on this planet, going directly against like nature's most core resilience pattern, which is diversity, like diversity and pluralism. Like we've just completely it's kind of like the equivalent of like the laws of physics, but in terms of like nature and survival. And like that's part of why we're facing, you know, existential risk and like massive species destruction. So I think like that's been like a huge realization that's opened up to me from the imagination work. So I think rather than like really specific worlds of the future, like, oh, it'll, you know, you can come up with like all sorts of really like fantastical, like especially technology or like the way that we'll be working with data or like very dystopian futures. Like it's not just utopian. I think a lot of this imagining work like comes up with like very dystopian situations. Like I think the really interesting thing is like what they open up in terms of like the way we see the world today. Like that's the interesting thing for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think that there's probably so many possible worlds out there, both dystopian and utopian, fragile and anti-fragile, that can be imagined when you have imagination technology. Totally. Is there anything? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, like, also there's many, you know, it also opens your eyes to the fact that there are many worlds existing today, which is obvious to some people, but really realizing that, you know, we live in a world of many worlds. Like we think that there's just one world, but actually, like, you know, as William Gibson says, like, you know, or it's like a play on that, on the William Gibson quote, like the apocalypse is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So when we say like, oh my God, apocalypse is coming, like loads of people in the world today would say like, oh, that's been my reality for like the last 50 years. But yeah, that's all I was going to add.
Wow. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to tell the audience before we wrap up?
I think one of the ways that we met was when I tweeted recently about running a Web3 like a course on Web3 and crypto for regen and culture folks, like so that because I live in this like interesting intersection of different networks where like one half of my Twitter is like Web3 crypto people and the other half is like regen culture people who have like no overlap with the other half. So it feels like very schizophrenic. So I'm super excited about that, developing a course that really, really is for the people who have like zero experience, zero understanding of Web3 and crypto. Because I often get approached by people in my network on that regen side where they're just like, I get this sense that crypto is like really bad for the planet, but like I don't fully like have the understanding of all of it and like DAOs and what are these things. And I just think like, even if the sole purpose of doing, you know, like running courses in education for folks in that sphere on Web3 and crypto is just so that they can have better criticisms, I feel like that's really good for us in the Web3 space, because then you can actually have the critical conversations and like recognize as well that Web3 is like so in its infancy. Like right now, like, yeah, I really believe that we're like right at the very beginning. And like, you know, a lot of people will say like, yeah, like Web3 is here, or like, it's all here now. Like, I really think like a lot of it doesn't even fully work. Like, we're just at the beginning, we're just typing. So we really need like the cultural, like sociologists, like political science, you know, democracy activists, like all of those folks who've got all that experience. Like, we need them in the space actually like understanding what the technicals, the technicalities, like all of that stuff, so that we can actually like develop something that is better, even if it's like a lot of criticism.
Right. Yeah, I just feel like there's this real when our powers combine moment with regen circles that you traffic in and the Web3 circles that maybe the audience of this podcast are a little bit more involved in. And I'm curious to see how those things clash, but also what kind of synergies are created between those two communities as we push forward. And I think you're really at the epicenter of both of those things. So if people in our audience want to get involved in imagination technology or any of the work that they're doing, where can they find you online?
So like Twitter handle is solarpunk_girl or moralimaginations.com. Like, get in touch, sign up to our newsletter, and that, you know, I'll also be emailing out about this new organization that will be expanding that work. So yeah, we'd love to hear from anyone.
Amazing. We'll put those links in the show notes. Anything else that you want to add before we end the episode?
No, just love the green pill. I think it's awesome. Like,
yeah,
much needed meme. And yeah, it's been great to chat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. Great to have you.